I've finally played Thimbleweed Park, and I don't think it works. Allow me to explain why in nauseating detail. Thimbleweed Park is the creation of renowned point-and-click developers Ron Gilbert and Gary Winnick, known for their LucasArts titles including Maniac Mansion, Day of the Tentacle, and The Secret of Monkey Island. Thimbleweed seems to be a spiritual successor to Maniac Mansion. I have never played Maniac Mansion, so I lack some of the nostalgia on which this game was intended to capitalize, which means my thoughts on the game will be 100% objective. Similarly to Maniac, Thimbleweed features 6 playable characters. Playable character number 1 arrives in the small town of Thimbleweed Park to meet someone. He is murdered by the bridge a couple minutes into gameplay. His name is unknown and unimportant. Playable character number 2 is Federal Agent Angela Ray, sent to the small town to investigate the murder. Playable character 3 is Federal Agent Antonio Reyes. I was going to wonder why they have such similar names, then I realized they actually missed an opportunity by not naming playable character number 3 Angel Reyes. Shame. Reyes was also sent to investigate the murder, but Ray believes he invited himself along for some other reason.
Tell me again why you're here.
I was assigned to the case by the Home Office in Albuquerque.
There is no home office in Albuquerque.
It's neat to know.
But for now, she must begrudgingly work with him to solve the mystery of playable character number 1's demise. The beginning portion of the game has the player play as these 2 agents as they explore the town, gathering evidence and information in an effort to identify playable character number 1's murderer. The player can switch between the 2 characters at any time by clicking on their face up in the corner. Whichever character you are not using at the moment will remain on pause, standing right where you left them until you select them again. We rather quickly run into a little problem with this setup. I've never played an adventure game before in which you control 2 characters who have access to most of the same locations and abilities. Usually, when there's 2 or more characters, they're sectioned off into different areas, or they have very different ways of interacting with the world. But Ray and Reyes have access to all the same things, which calls for a suspension of disbelief that isn't usually required. If you play as Ray and have Ray, say, learn information from Ricky, while Reyes is off in a different room somewhere, then logically, Ray should now have that information, and Reyes should not. So Reyes should be unable to act on the information. We now have a mismatch between the player's knowledge and the character's knowledge. When there's only one playable character, you rarely ever have this mismatch. They have all the same information as the player, so everything the player could possibly have them do can be rationalized as the player trying to figure things out, acting on the understanding they have of their situation, same as the player. But when there's 2 characters that one player can switch between arbitrarily, you create the opportunity for character actions that lack motivation in universe. This could be remedied if the characters were locked into different areas in which they pursued different objectives. Then you could easily write such that one character would never need to act upon information that only the other should have. This would also be remedied if the characters always moved together. Then we could rationalize that everyone in the room hears this conversation and absorbs the information, even if they're not actively participating at the moment. Neither of these are true of Thimbleweed, but perhaps I'm overthinking it. The agents are probably comparing notes every time they cross paths. The game doesn't stop to show us this, because that would be tedious. Ray has the only phone, so they would need to literally cross paths in order to talk, but yeah, I can assume that's happening. Still, I do wish the player experience between them was more distinct. There is almost no reason to switch between the characters when it comes to completing objectives. They can go to all the same locations, collect the same items, perform the same actions, talk to the same people, and have pretty much the same conversations. This last bit was particularly disappointing for me. These 2 have distinctly different personalities, yet conversations with the NPCs around town will largely go the same way, no matter who you're playing as. Even inane observations of your surroundings will often be exactly the same, no matter which character you're using.
Words do not do it justice.
Words don't 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 do it justice.
Now, I wouldn't know this from experience, but I imagine the script writing process for an adventure game protagonist is quite long. What with having to script all cutscenes, all dialogue trees with other characters, and possibly bespoke responses to all possible player actions, including observations about every object you can interact with in the game world, and every inventory item combination a player could possibly propose. So I can imagine scripting 5 player characters could be a bit of a nightmare. So I can't blame Mr. Gilbert for giving them all the same reactions to most things. But the experience would be vastly more interesting and more immersive if there was more variation in the things the characters say. As it stands, the only meaningful difference between these two is that they each have a couple of arbitrary items that they will not trade with the other. So if you want to use a cell phone, you have to play as Ray. Otherwise, these two are pretty much interchangeable gameplay-wise. There is one puzzle that calls for the two characters to coordinate their actions, then there will be a couple more of these after we unlock the other characters. But for this first section, you could almost play the whole act with just one agent. Oh, speaking of which, you're still waiting for me to reveal who the other characters are. We are introduced to the other playable characters through flashbacks long before they actually enter the story. Playable character number 4 is introduced by Sandy, the girl who works the counter at the diner. When asked if she knows anything about the recent murder, she responds by talking about Ransome the clown. I don't know why she decides it's appropriate to implicate him. I mean, this would make some sense if Ransome was like a weird loner who keeps to himself, rarely comes into town, and no one really knows much about him. But that's not the impression you get when you meet him. He comes across more as a local nuisance. Nobody likes him, and he doesn't like anyone else, but the people around town don't treat him like a stranger. So for Sandy to so quickly cast suspicion on what amounts to her rude, annoying neighbor when asked about a murder seems odd. She must really hate Ransome. We will never be given a reason for her to particularly hate Ransome. But enough about Sandy. Ransome was once a popular insult clown, which means his gimmick was to, hey look, it's the Innocents from Maniac Mansion. Do they live in Thimbleweed County? Anyway, his gimmick was to go up on stage and insult the audience. The insults were not funny.
Hey you, kid with a crappy wheelchair. Were you in a past life or something? Seriously, kid, you're in a wheelchair, and you got a face that looks like that? God's definitely punishing you for something.
The in-universe characters did not find the insults funny.
The jokes all suck.
Most laugh because they were uncomfortable, and laughing is the best way to hide from the embarrassment of others.
I don't know why this man had a... Wait, is that Guybrush? That's Guybrush Threepwood. Anyway, everything changed for the wannabe comic when he attacked the wrong voodoo practitioner. Ransome insulted Madame Morena's mole during his last performance. And she, even the tentacle is here? Okay guys, this is a little excessive. Anyway, the Madame cursed Ransome to be stuck with his makeup on forever, and to roam the circus grounds until the end of time. Immediately after that performance, Ransome's lawyer quit, his wife left him and took all his assets, and he suddenly found he couldn't remove his makeup, and his career came to a screeching halt. Now he lives in the abandoned carnival grounds with nothing to do.
And that's why Ransome the clown is such a creep. And you should go arrest him for murder.
What does any of that have to do with murder? If you go to the bus stop, you'll meet Lenore Edmund Mulch, the niece of the illustrious Chuck Edmund.
Hi, Chuck.
Chuck Edmund basically built Thimbleweed Park. His pillow factory and his revolutionary vacuum tube-powered AI machines brought prosperity to the small town. Ever since the pillow factory burned down some time ago, the town has been suffering a slow death. By the time of the murder, half the businesses in town are closed, half the buildings boarded up. Chuck himself is recently deceased, and Lenore will be meeting her family later tonight for the reading of his will. When you question Lenore about the murder, she, for some reason, throws her sister Delores under the bus. Man, there's a lot of hatred going around. Lenore then goes on to initiate another flashback in which the player plays as Delores and experiences events from Dolores' perspective, which raises questions as to how Lenore is recalling the story when she wasn't even there. But Delores is playable character number 5. Delores was formerly designated as the heir to the business her uncle Chuck had built, because Chuck had no children of his own, and Lenore is... You know, they never do explain why Lenore was passed over. I mean, I could make guesses.
There is something about a man in federally mandated polyester that makes me want to forget my wedding vows.
But it really comes across as if Chuck just forgot his brother had 2 daughters.
Explain that, Chuck!
Anyway, Delores always wanted to make point-and-click adventure games, rather than pillows and robots, and she secretly applied for a job at Mucus Phlegm. When she got the job offer, and finally broke the news to her uncle, he blew up and disowned her.
You are out of my will! You're giving up over $10 million! You are dead to me!
Delores left Thimbleweed Park to make games, but has now returned for the reading of Chuck's will now that he's deceased. Lenore thinks she probably committed the murder. After all,
It's the 80s!
and in the 80s, everyone believed video games bred murderers. So obviously, as a maker of murder simulators, Delores would be primed to commit actual murders, even though Delores has told her sister countless times that she makes point-and-click adventure games. You don't kill anyone in point-and-click adventure games. I stand corrected. Put her on trial. Okay, does anybody have any serious suspects? Anyone who's actually suspicious? No? Okay, moving on. After some rigmarole involving maps, we gain access to the outskirts of town. Now we can go meet our suspects in the present day. We'll go to the circus grounds and meet Ransome the Clown, the annoyed has-been, and comes to the gate to meet the feds. They ask him some questions that confirm he knows nothing about what's going on, and then the fed is done and Ransome goes back to his trailer. And now Ransome is a playable character, whose icon is added to the list. You can now play as Ransome, and have him perform actions to help with the murder investigation. But why? Why is he helping? He didn't seem interested when he was being questioned. No one asked him to help. It's not his job. None of this has anything to do with him. Why is Ransome part of the team now? Next, we'll stop by the Mansion to talk to Delores. And that's not an editing mistake. They actually call it the Mansion. I think it's supposed to be a callback to Maniac Mansion, which this mansion shares some features with. But I couldn't begin to explain, in universe, why everyone would call it the Mansion. Anyway, we knock on the door and Delores answers. She says this isn't a good time to talk, because the family is about to read Chuck's will in the mansion library. Surprisingly, the feds accept this and just leave until a more convenient time. Now, I've never had the feds arrive at my doorstep, thank God, but I would be surprised if I could get them to leave just by telling them this is a bad time for me. It's not even true. They can't read the will now because I don't know when the attorney is going to show up, so Delores has to go out to find him. But playable character number 5 has been unlocked now. Delores makes even less sense than Ransome. She barely spoke to the agent, didn't even exchange names with them. No one has explained anything to her about the murderer. Does she even know what's going on? I don't know, but now she's inexplicably a member of the team who's going to help find and arrest the killer who murdered playable character number 1. You know, games with just one player character don't have to worry about raising questions of character motivation. So next we'll go to the woods. That was a mistake. Next we'll go to the hotel. The murder victim had a room key from here. There might be some helpful clues we can find. On our way in, we bump into Natalie, the writer and editor for the town's paper Nickel News. Natalie tells whoever you are that she's investigating the disappearance of Frank Edmund, Dolores' father and Chuck's brother. Franklin was Chuck's business partner, but was always pushed around by his rather domineering brother. 2 weeks before the events of this game, he was seen in the hotel lobby, and then he vanished. Natalie initiates a flashback in which we play as Franklin in the moments leading up to his disappearance. Okay, this is worse than the other flashbacks. Natalie cannot possibly know 99% of the information presented in this sequence. With Sandy and Lenore, it is technically possible for someone to explain the events to them in autistic detail after the fact. Natalie makes it very clear that she does not know what happened to Franklin. She has no idea why he was even at the hotel. She cannot possibly tell the player character about any of the information in this flashback. Maybe I'm looking at it wrong. These aren't really flashbacks we're seeing. These are actually cutaways. Natalie mentioned Franklin's last sighting, and so the game just cut away to the past so we can see Franklin on that day. Yeah, that's what's happening. I do wish they wouldn't do the wiggly melting image thing, though, leading into the cutaway. That usually indicates we're about to go into someone's head. It's very misleading. Anyway, Franklin wanted to restart the pillow factory and expand their business into the production of plush toys, but Chuck really hated the idea for some reason.
We'll try, Chuck.
And Franklin was always afraid to stand up to him. So Franklin resolved to prove the merits of his idea by meeting some investors at the hotel in secret. Now, Chuck was extremely controlling, had the entire town under his thumb, and had eyes everywhere, so Franklin had to do a lot of work to make sure his meeting would indeed be secret. Alas, his efforts were in vain, and he was murdered before the investors arrived.
Franklin was never seen again.
Now remember, the characters don't know anything of what I just told you, but they figure it might be a good idea to figure out which room Franklin was in and check it out, but there's not much of interest here, so they just leave. And then the ghost of Franklin Edmund wonders why they couldn't see him. Playable character number 6, ladies and gentlemen. We can now add a ghost to the team. He appears to just now be awakening as a ghost, even though he's been dead for 2 weeks and his body has long since been removed. But now he's going to help with the investigation, which leads to even more questions about motivation. Here's how ghosts work in this world. They are completely imperceptible to humans. They cannot be seen, heard, or felt under normal circumstances. They cannot move normal objects, but they can move ghost objects. Don't ask me where ghost objects come from. They can cause the temperature to drop to the point of freezing water. They can blow air, splash water, and activate machines, all of which are physical activities, but whatever. Oh, and even though I just said they can't be heard by the living, they can moan and wail over the phone and be heard. That's important to know for one of the puzzles, even though it makes no sense. The important thing to understand is that Franklin has no way of communicating with the other characters, and since he was killed long before playable character number 1's murder, and his soul is now bound to the hotel building, he probably has no idea what's going on out there. So if Franklin does anything that helps the other playable characters accomplish their goals, and which he would have no selfish reason to do, that won't make any sense. It would be very strange if this character served mostly as a means of helping the other characters achieve their goals by using his power to access things they can't, meanwhile accomplishing very little towards his own goals. Nevertheless, we've now assembled all our heroes and we can solve the case. The evidence points to local bum, Willie T. Wino. We show the reports to the sheriff and he arrests Willie. This man has clearly been framed. If you've talked with Willie before, you'll know that Chuck had a grudge against him. It's obvious to the player that Chuck, or someone hired by Chuck, committed the murder, and then Chuck planted evidence to frame Willie. This case is not over. But the feds can't deny the evidence, so they just pack up and go home. Now what? I think there's a structural flaw in the game here. The murder investigation is over, but the game is clearly not done. Yet there isn't a clear sense of what you should be doing. Your main objective has been fulfilled. It might have helped if the motivations of the 5 individual playable characters weren't so confusing, but now we kind of flounder for a few minutes. If you switch to any character, they'll start monologuing about their new objective. Delores and Ransome both suddenly want to break into the abandoned pillow factory. Delores because she wants to find out what made her uncle become so obsessed those last few years.
Sometimes I wonder about you, Chuck.
Ransome because he and Franklin were supposed to start producing some Ransome clown dolls before Franklin's disappearance, and he wants to see if there are any prototype dolls in the factory he can use to launch his comeback. Neither of these characters talked about wanting to do this before. Nothing has happened that could have prompted them to take on this objective at this time. But the murder investigation is over, so now we need a new direction. Oh, by the way, if you don't switch to another character right away, then you will not hear these monologues, and you will be left truly wandering around aimlessly for a while. After a few minutes of floundering, playable characters 2 and 3 return to Thimbleweed, and we learn why they're really here. It turns out, Agent Reyes is the son of the security guard who died in the pillow factory fire. Reyes' father was blamed for the incident, but the son believes there's more to the story. He wants to break into the factory and clear his father's name. Rey is a spy hired by a Japanese company to find a secret to Chuck's AI and bring it back to them. She doesn't tell Reyes that, but that's why she's here.
I'm here to find the secrets to the Pillow Factory AI for the NSA. It involves top secret national security.
So it looks like everyone wants to get inside that factory now. Well, except Franklin. Franklin just wants to talk to his daughter one last time. He doesn't want to talk to anyone else. Just his daughter. What do you mean, which one? Delores. But the other 4 now have a common goal for the first time, halfway through the game. And they all just know telepathically that they have a common goal. And they should work together. It would have been nice if there was some cutscene in which all 4 characters discussed their reasons for wanting to enter the factory and agreed to work together to gain access, but we do not have that. What we have is a scene of the 2 feds discussing their motives and agreeing to work together, and the others just fall in line with them, because they're all part of a hive mind or something. You know, in Maniac Mansion, that game I haven't played, the 7 playable characters are all friends who begin the game with the common goal of rescuing their friend Sandy. They have a clearly established unified mission and connection from the beginning, so no one is prompted to ask why these kids are working together. In Thimbleweed Park, our protagonists are all either strangers or mild acquaintances, who have completely different personal agendas, who all join the team at different times and have no establishing scene to rationalize their collaboration. It's strange to think these two games were made by the same people, but for some reason they seem to care less about character motivations in the later game. Most of the character issues aside, Thimbleweed Park has an interesting structure. Most of the point-and-click games I've played before tend to avoid giving the player things to focus on that aren't relevant yet. At any point in time, you're only given access to the things you need to accomplish your current objectives. Once those objectives are complete, you are then given a new set of objectives, along with a new set of resources, puzzles, and/or locations to help you complete them. This is usually accomplished in one of two ways. Some games have your characters relegated to a relatively small area. You have access to all items, locations, and puzzles in that area, and you will need to solve all the puzzles in order to complete your character's objectives. Once those objectives are met, the game will either take you to a new area with a new set of puzzles to solve, or the current area will change, such that there's suddenly a new set of puzzles to navigate. Other games instead opt to let you spend most of your time in a large open world, in which you have access to most of the game's puzzles and locations all at once, and can accomplish your objectives in any order. But either way, the player will usually not be presented with puzzles that he doesn't have the ability to solve. So if, say, there's a locked gate leading to the villain's evil fortress, then there will be a key to the gate that you can acquire somewhere in the game world, and you will need to unlock the gate in order to complete your objectives. If you are not supposed to and not able to enter the gate until a later chapter of the game, then either they won't show you the gate at all, or there will be some kind of signposting to indicate that you should not waste your time worrying about the gate right now. Put simply, most game avoids presenting you with puzzles until you have a need to solve them. Thimbleweed Park does not follow this pattern. After the brief period in the beginning of the game in which you're barred from the outskirts of town, the entire game world is available for you for pretty much the entire game, and pretty much all the puzzles are available as well. This means that as you are trying to collect evidence for the murder during the first 3 acts of the game, there are puzzles you can easily be distracted by that won't help you solve the murder, some of which are impossible to solve until the state of the game changes slightly in Act 4, and even then, the state change just boils down to the bank and ThimbleCon opening, giving you access to 3 new rooms. So even outside of that middle period where the character motivations are lost, it can be difficult to tell what you should focus on. A lot of these puzzles also have rewards that are rather unpredictable, so you would never intuitively connect them to your goals. For example, you need to enter the Ransome lookalike contest in order to win a theremin music record, but no one tells you beforehand that the record is one of the prizes, so you're given no reason to spend time on the contest at all. And if you're looking for the record, knowing you need it, you have no idea where to look. On top of that, this game has an unusual number of inventory items and world details that you don't need to use at all. I know that some of these are rewards for the Kickstarter backers, some of them are remnants from a cut puzzle sequence, and some of them are part of extra side quests that you don't gain anything from completing. Now principally, I don't have a problem with useless items in the game to make the world feel more real, but in this case they do add to the difficulty in understanding how everything is connected. Franklin has the objective early on to reach the hotel penthouse, but he can't because the Lady Ghost has been tasked with barring everyone from reaching it. There is nothing you can do about this. If you try to talk to her, she refuses to engage.
I don't talk to new ghosts. Leave me alone.
Then, after the murder is solved, she suddenly changes her attitude and wants to talk.
Can't cope with the boredom anymore. Talk to me now.
Okay.
And now you can persuade her to let you pass. This is annoying. If the game is going to withhold things from me, I want it to be because I need to unlock them. I don't want it to be because I'm just waiting for the characters to arbitrarily change their minds. That just feels random and unearned. New opportunities need to feel earned. Here's the weirdest puzzle. Remember how I showed you that pizza guy in the woods earlier and refused to elaborate? I just wanted you to sit with the confusion that I endured for a couple days. Every time you come here, you'll see a different random character walk by and disappear into the woods. If you try to follow them, they vanish. Okay, obviously there's something going on out there and I'll have to use some kind of trick to find it. Later you can get a flyer that confirms that Pizza Guy is having some secret meetings out there, but there's no information on the flyer to help you find the location. So in my initial playthrough, I knew very early on that there was something in the woods that I would probably probably need to find at some point, but it wasn't obvious how I was supposed to find it, and the story was giving me no reason to worry about it, so I just ignored it. This turned out to be the right call, because the tools you need to solve this one don't become available until pretty late in the game. But by that point, I had forgotten all about it, because I still had no reason to care about the meeting. Except, actually, I did, because, as this flyer tells me, they have an electric fence. And I need an electric fence in order to charge this battery. And I'm gonna be honest, I never would have intuited that on my own. Well, now that I'm here, I guess I might as well attend the meeting, even though I have no reason to do so. But I need to, because they'll give me items I need later. I can't confidently say this game structure is bad, but I will say I often found myself at a loss for what to focus on during my initial gameplay. And I think having so many unsolvable puzzles available early on, with so many unpredictable rewards, and so many superfluous items, certainly contributed to that lack of direction. I do generally prefer the more open world model used here over the small chapter by chapter model, but I also like having a clear sense of what my objectives are at all times. If I hadn't long since developed the approach of just doing everything the game will let me do and seeing what happens, I imagine this game would have been extremely difficult to solve. Whereas with most games, I feel like you could do pretty well reasoning your way through puzzles, even if you only did what was logical in the moment. I should acknowledge that the game does try to give you a sense of direction by providing each character with a to-do list that you can review at any time, but even these lists are a bit misleading. But back to the Pillow Factory. After hard work infiltrating secret meetings, impersonating clowns, crashing radio broadcasts, and haunting the only guest in the hotel, we finally unlock the factory doors and discover that the long-abandoned factory is very much alive on the inside. Everyone thought the building was empty, but it seems Chuck has secretly continued to develop his AI machines and kept them busy with something.
All right, Chuck. What happened?
Our intrepid crew must continue their journey deeper into the factory until they come face to face with the villain of our story, digitized Chuck Edmund. Before his recent death, Chuck had his consciousness uploaded into the factory's computer system, but the AI has taken over and turned him evil. Now he's bent on world domination, or something. I'm honestly a little lost in his motivations here. It seems the only thing to be done is to shut the computer down before it can cause any further damage. As the only person who understands computers, because this is the 80s, this task falls to Delores. But after only half shutting down the computer, Chuck suddenly becomes lucid enough to talk to her plainly and explain why he did all this.
Explain yourself, Chuck!
You see, as Chuck developed his AI technology further and further, he became increasingly enamored with digital worlds. His research eventually led him to a stunning realization. His entire world is a video game. Delores, why is your jaw on the floor? This isn't news to you. You already knew this. You all knew. I know you knew, because I spent the entire game listening to you people point it out over and over again.
The body is starting to pixelate.
This is really odd. Should I save my game?
I wouldn't worry about it. The game was expertly designed to have no dead ends or death. Yet still be scary and have a sense of tension. You can feel safe exploring whatever you want.
The hole in the victim's head doesn't look like a gunshot, more like a puncture from a sharp object. Which is odd, because the opening title sequence clearly showed a gunshot with accompanying sound effect.
I don't believe in ghosts, unlike certain other agents. Sorry, that's not the reaction you wanted, is it? What I meant to say was...
This clock looks vaguely familiar. Maybe more highly rendered and smoother pendulum action.
This cutscene is starting to get long, and it's only gonna get longer.
If this were a Sierra Online graphic adventure, I'd be dead now.
There's no path beyond this point. It just looks like unfinished temp art from a cut room.
Maybe I should save the game first.
All this climbing just to solve a puzzle.
Honoring past adventure gamers who have reached this spot without a shovel and need to load a save game.
I'm sure it has a very important use near the end of the game.
That's a huge toilet. Seems out of scale.
If I'm not careful, it will stick everything in my inventory together.
There are boxes waiting to be shipped or picked up, but not by anyone in this game.
Look, maybe you should just try switching to Reyes. The button is in the upper right corner.
You all knew you were in a video game, and you were all just okay with that. I don't know why Chuck needed his AI machine to tell him what everyone else already knows.
Explain that, Chuck!
But John, those are just jokes. Jokes don't count towards world building and characterization. Yes, they do! If your jokes contradict your story, you've written bad jokes. If there was only one fourth wall break, I can ignore it. But as you may have noticed, this game really likes meta humor, so these breaks are all over the place. If all these bits were relegated to one character, then I could suppose that just this one character is aware of it, and everyone else is not. But as you can plainly see, this is not the case. You can't spend the entire game acting like there is no fourth wall, only to conclude with the character suddenly discovering the fourth wall and acting like this changes everything. But that's not the worst problem. The worst problem is that the story comes to a screeching halt. You see, Chuck's discovery has led him to take a nihilistic view on his reality, which is part of the reason he ordered those hits on his brother in playable character number 1. Oh, I should explain. Playable character number 1 was the investor Franklin was supposed to meet. But they're not real people. They're just digital creations, so it doesn't matter that Chuck murdered them. Nothing matters. The whole world is fake. None of these people have free will. They're just puppets, placed here by the developers to dance for the player's amusement. And now that they know the truth, they should just end it all, because existence is meaningless. And the other characters agree. There's no discussion about it, no debate, just our world is fake, which means our lives are meaningless, so we should obviously just end it. I find this deeply unsatisfying. It doesn't need to be like this. You can do a meta reveal without going full nihilist. UnderTale also has characters with meta awareness, but their game doesn't go down this route. Just because some of the characters are aware that they're in a game, or at least that they're in a time loop, doesn't mean their lives don't matter to them. It doesn't make their world, their loved ones, their problems any less real. They still care about their world. The game still cares about its story, and it wants the player to care. It still seeks to bring all the storylines it set up to a meaningful conclusion. It takes its story and characters seriously. Just because you want to acknowledge and deconstruct video games as a medium doesn't mean you can't tell a heartfelt story at the same time. UnderTale expects the player to be invested in its characters, and it rewards that investment. Thimbleweed Park effectively punishes you for being invested. Were you hoping to eventually clear Willie's name? Were you wondering what's going to happen to all the townsfolk whose businesses are dying? Were you wondering if Ransome's curse will ever be lifted? What will happen to all the townspeople when the town gets razed for a giant server farm per Chuck's will? Will the sheriff ever be exposed for his complicity in Chuck's crimes? What about those plans for the plush toys? What about those conspiracy theorists who always suspected Chuck and his machines were up to something? What would they think of all this? What was this cutscene with Sandy and Dave about?
Where did we go wrong, Dave?
I don't know. But if we can pull this off, I think we'll be fine again.
Why do the admins keep disregarding Lenore's existence? None of that matters, it's all just a game, and the game's about to end. Permanently. Well, okay, the game does try to give some tacked-on closure to all the playable characters, except for playable character number 1, may he rest in peace. Chuck gives each one of them an item that will help them achieve their endings. They then disperse to pursue their endings, even though they all know Delores will fulfill Chuck's wishes and delete their entire existence right after they do it, so none of this will really matter in a few minutes. Agent Ray is given a Game of the Year trophy, which she gives to one of Thimbleweed Park's developers, so that they'll leave in excitement, allowing her to steal the puzzle dependency chart. She then exchanges messages with her employer somehow, and asks him to get her out of this world before it gets deleted.
That tickled.
Wait, so was Ray hired by some Japanese game company to go inside the game and uncover Ron Gilbert's game design secrets? And the secret was just a puzzle dependency chart? That's not a secret. Everyone knows about puzzle dependency charts. Yeah, okay, so almost no one knows, but everyone who has a reason to know what that is knows. It's not a secret. In all seriousness, Ray's presence in the game feels a bit redundant overall. The other characters have a bit of an emotional journey, but she feels particularly flat and static. The role she plays in the narrative and many of the puzzles is extremely similar to the far more compelling Agent Reyes. Reyes' father gives him a personal connection to the plot that makes him easier to get invested in. I actually did a playthrough in which I used Ray as little as possible, and I found that the only times you even need her are in 3 puzzles that force you to use all available characters. And one other time at the very end of the game. The only thing special about her is that she has the cell phone, which makes things more convenient, but you don't have to use it. But if she was supposed to be a spy inserted into the game on a mission of corporate espionage, I suppose it stands to reason that she would seem tacked on. So having her add so little to the experience may have been an intentional stroke of genius on the developer's part. Anyway, Agent Reyes is given Chuck's written confession that his own mishandling of the machines caused a factory fire, and Reyes' father is innocent. Reyes takes his confession to Natalie at the newspaper office and has her publish the story in the next day's paper. Since time doesn't pass in the game, and the world is about to end, no one besides the player will ever read the headline. Reyes knows this, but somehow still feels a sense of vindication for having done this. By the way, Natalie hardly seems to care to learn that she's just a sprite and Delores is about to kill them all. Ransome's character suddenly goes in an entirely new direction. Up to this point, his only goals have been to get his makeup off and find those plush toys so he can use them to restart his career. Now suddenly, he wants to change as a person and insult people without being cruel. Where did this come from? The only hint you get of any introspection from Ransome is in an entirely optional conversation you can have with Natalie earlier. I can accept the idea that the end of the world might make someone rearrange their priorities, but this is just too abrupt. By the way, this is the failure of the checklist. Some of Ransome's objectives are never even achieved. You never get his makeup off, you never find those prototype dolls, which means Ransome's entire reason for breaking into the factory ultimately goes nowhere. So Chuck gives Ransome an "I'm sorry" card, which you're obviously supposed to give to Madame Morena. Insulting her is what started all Ransome's problems. Perhaps a sincere apology would persuade her to lift the curse. What? She's gone? Along with most of the other NPCs? Well, what are we supposed to do with this? No one else in this town has been established as bearing a grudge against Ransome. I mean, most people don't like him, but no one stands out in that regard. Oh, you're supposed to give it to Sandy. Has Ransome been a particularly big jerk to Sandy? I don't know, but he needs a favor from her. See, she's the one who initiated the Ransome flashback earlier. Ransome knows she did this, even though he wasn't there. He needs her to send him back into his flashback, cut away, so he can have a do-over of his final performance, even though these are his memories, so you'd think he could do his own cutaway. Anyway, cutaways don't change the past. That's not how they work. Anyway, he goes back to the event and redoes the performance that Sandy told us about earlier. Now, depending on what the player does, Ransome either repeats the unfunny insults from before and cries because he blew his last chance, or he pulls his punches on every insult, rendering the performance even less funny.
Hey you, kid with a crappy wheelchair. You should contact the Ransome Foundation about getting a new one for free.
But everyone loves him now, and it's the best performance of his career. Have the developers never heard of a roast? You do understand there are ways to good-naturedly insult people while being funny. Yeah, there's a delicate balance and always a bit of risk, especially when insulting people you don't know personally, but this is a thing that can be done. This ain't it. But seriously, why are people bringing children to this show? Ransome is certainly the strangest addition to the main cast, and that's actually not because he's a clown. Unlike Delores and Franklin, he has no personal investment in Chuck's affairs. And unlike Ray and Reyes, he has no responsibility in investigating the murder. His only personal tie to the story is his failed business arrangement with Franklin, which has very little to do with the rest of the story. It has no payoff because his quest to find those Ransome dolls fails. In fact, once the characters enter the factory, the dolls are never even brought up. It's almost like this is written as an afterthought just to give Ransome an excuse to get involved. If that is what happened, it would explain why Ransome's motivations shift dramatically throughout the game. In the earlier portion of the game, he helps out just to clear his name, I guess, even though there's no evidence against him. In this second portion, out of absolutely nowhere, he wants to break into the factory to find those Ransome dolls. Then, after learning the truth about Chuck, he suddenly wants to redeem himself as a performer and stop being such a jerk. I have to wonder if Ransome was envisioned purely for comic purposes, and then his motivations were hastily tacked on later. He isn't quite as superfluous as Ray. Ransome does have an arc. I just wish that arc had been weaved throughout the story instead of happening all at once at the end. Anyway, Franklin suddenly grows a spine and decides to stand up to Xavier, the ghost who's been bossing him around. Once again, we have a Franklin objective that we couldn't complete earlier, simply because the characters did not feel like cooperating with you. If you tried to confront Xavier earlier, Franklin would just chicken out.
Sorry, to bother you, Xavier.
But now that the developers want you to do the thing, Franklin suddenly changes his tune, and now you can do the thing that you already knew you needed to do, hours ago. So he confronts Xavier, gets the artifact he needs to talk to the living, and if you get Delores to come to the penthouse, they can have one last conversation before Franklin is finally able to pass on. Now I know what you're thinking. Why did Delores come to the penthouse? She didn't know Franklin was here. Also, Lenore is very unloved, and that makes me sad. I guess Franklin's character arc of learning to stand up for himself is kind of nice. It's a shame he had to die before he completed it. It's also a shame the change happened all at once, kinda like Ransome. And unlike Ransome, Franklin didn't know yet that the world was about to end, so there's no sense of urgency to explain his sudden turn. I must say, Franklin's unique set of abilities and limitations certainly makes him the most unique character to play as. If the others are too similar in their capabilities, Franklin provides a whole new way of experiencing the game world. Unfortunately, he's also the worst offender in raising questions of character motivation. His main objective the entire time is to find a way to speak to his daughter again, but he spends most of his time doing things to facilitate the other characters' objectives, things which, from his perspective, should seem random and pointless. Last comes Delores, who should probably be considered the main protagonist of the game. Chuck sends her on a mission to go into the game's wireframe, find the wireframe AI machine and disable it, causing the game to delete itself and ending their existence. And I don't really have anything to say about this, so I'm not going to show you any footage of that portion of the game. You'll just have to play it for yourself. But perhaps my lack of commentary goes to demonstrate just how empty this ending is. The story is already over, or rather, abandoned at this point. So there's little for Delores to do but walk around in silence until she completes her objective. So on that depressing note, I immediately took to the interwebs to air my grievances. Actually no, I'm not like that. Yet. No, I took to the interwebs to hear about other people's grievances. Some of them did share my complaints, both with the ending and with the logic of why these characters are working together at all. A lot of comparisons have been drawn between the ending of Thimbleweed Park and the endings of Gilbert's other games in the Monkey Island series. For those who don't know, Monkey Island 2, LeChuck's Revenge, ends with the reveal that protagonist Guybrush and villain LeChuck are two little boys pretending to be pirates in an amusement park. Or are they? The following installment, The Curse of Monkey Island, tries to explain this away as LeChuck putting Guybrush under some spell and trapping him as a child in an amusement park. 25 years later, Return to Monkey Island started where Revenge left off and revealed that one of the little boys was the son of Guybrush, and he and his friend had been play acting based on the stories Guybrush had told them of his adventures. But then, Guybrush tells another story that ends with him being a flooring inspector at a pirate-themed amusement park attraction. Between these and Thimbleweed Park, some people have begun to wonder if Mr. Gilbert simply doesn't know how to write endings. Which is a problem I can relate to. I have no idea how to end these videos. I hate how often that would work. Personally, I think Thimbleweed's ending is significantly worse than that of any of Ron's Monkey Island endings. Yes, they all have the element of pulling the rug out from under you, but the Monkey Island games don't leave nearly as many loose ends before their twist. In Revenge, the story is pretty much over, and the twist comes after LeChuck has been defeated. It also leaves a lot of room for interpretation. With the knowledge that the whole adventure might be taking place in an amusement park, one can look back and recontextualize many elements of the world and its characters. A lot of the anachronisms and quirks of the environment make more sense if you suppose it's all an amusement park. At the same time, the game implies that all may still not be as it seems. Curse's claim that the amusement park was a curse is a valid interpretation, intentionally set up by Revenge. Return adds more layers by presenting the idea that what we see may be a child's reenactment of stories his father told him, which may or may not be true. And even if they are true, there's no telling how much embellishment has been added, or how many details the kids have changed. The Monkey Island games are unclear on what the reality is. They give you multiple options for how you can interpret the reality. They're fun to think about. Thimbleweed, on the other hand, is pretty straightforward with its conclusion. The game is a game, which isn't really a twist because you already knew it was a game. Having the game acknowledge that it's a game doesn't recontextualize anything besides Chuck's actions. It doesn't create the potential to make things more interesting. The most you can say now is that anything missing from this world is due to the limitations of the game.
Like there is only one house in the whole town?
Exactly. Where does everyone live? We have only one house in a town of 80 people.
Which is lame. It just cheapens its own story. It lacks both Monkey Island's ambiguity and Undertale's sincerity, and leaves us with nothing interesting to explore. The thing about me is, I'm always here for the story above all else. The whole reason I gravitate to point-and-click games over others is because I can get stories without the distraction of gameplay. Platforming and combat are chores I have to get through in order to get to the next part of the story. I'm happy it's from the gameplay consists entirely of exploration. So you may have noticed most of my grabs at Thimbleweed Park boil down to issues with how it handles storytelling. While many do share these sentiments, I have been surprised at the number of people who seem completely unbothered by this. More surprisingly, Ron Gilbert himself has expressed surprise at people getting hung up on why these characters are working together.
And kind of related to that for me was the feedback on the idea that maybe, why are some of these characters actually willing to work with each other and share items and give things to each other? And when I was coding, it was kind of like, okay, well, this is adventure game logic, and you're in charge related to your mind who's doing all this stuff. You don't have to really worry about that. But for some people, that really got in the way for them staying in the story.
Yeah, that was surprising to me. That was surprising to me because there's just so many things in adventure games. I mean, all the way back to, Monkey Island and whatnot, where characters are doing things that, are magical in some reason, only because they're being controlled by this other, sentient being in the upper world. And I don't know that there's a good solution to it. I mean, I think from a story standpoint, there probably are really just like a couple of lines we could have added to the story. In Monkey Island, I mean, it was only Guybrush that ever knew anything, so you didn't have to worry about why somebody was doing something. But there's still, I mean, even in Monkey Island and all those games, people were doing things that didn't quite seem logical, that only seemed logical to the player because they had seen a piece of information in the world, and even though the player didn't necessarily know about that. But I don't think it's a line, right? It's just this big, messy gray area. You just kind of have to pick how far you're going to go in the line.
Now, maybe I just haven't played enough games, but I can't think of any in which characters take actions that have no in-universe explanation. I mean, there are plenty of times you'll do things that would be illogical in real life, but that doesn't mean they're illogical for the character and the weird world they live in. And as I stated earlier, as long as the character is privy to the same information as the player, you can always imagine they're simply trying to solve problems, just like you. Even when games have cutscenes, the player doesn't usually have to act on them. What this says to me is that the developers and the people who enjoy this game the most are not story people like I am. They were more focused on designing strong puzzles than they were on writing a strong narrative. That's not to say I don't think they were trying to tell a solid story, just that it wasn't the highest priority for them. The game was marketed as a return to form for adventure games, an experience just like what you'd get from playing those old LucasArts games from the late 80s. It was specifically designed for the fans of those games. That's why the game uses this primitive action menu, which I honestly found a little annoying. That's why it uses pixel art. That's why the meta humor is so excessive. That might be why it takes place in the 80s. Even the multiple player characters is probably a callback to Maniac Mansion. All of this serves to give those classic point-and-click fans an experience that feels exactly like the experiences they had as kids. And specifically in the goal of pleasing those fans, Thimbleweed Park appears to be a rousing success, but in some ways this is achieved at the expense of the more casual player, or even for the point-and-click fan who lacks nostalgia for this particular era of games. Several of the defenses I've seen against criticisms of the game consist of people just pointing out that it's a callback to those older games. And also to Twin Peaks. You know, if I have to be a fan of these other things in order to appreciate your thing, that doesn't make your thing good. For what it's worth, I do think the puzzles are solid. I would have appreciated a little more clarity on how some puzzles would help you reach your goals, but they generally provide a good balance of logic and complexity. The electric fence to charge the battery is the only solution I really think is too far out there. Of course, if you're an experienced point-and-click player, you may have developed the habit of tackling every puzzle presented to you, even if you don't know its purpose. In which case, the lack of direction won't hamper your experience very much. I have intentionally explained the puzzles as little as possible, because despite my complaints, I do think Thimbleweed Park is worth playing. It is an enjoyable, if illogical ride, at least until the conclusion, especially if you consider Maniac Mansion, Zack McCracken and the Alien Mindbenders, or The Secret of Monkey Island to be the peak of adventure games. You'll probably find Thimbleweed to be just what you're looking for in a game. I mean, I wouldn't know personally. I've only played Monkey Island.
Forget it, Chuck.